Hello and welcome. Today I am going to recap a movie called Limitless. Spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. The movie starts with a shot of a wealthy apartment with some unpacked boxes and someone trying to enter the apartment by trying to cut the door open. Our protagonist, Eddie, standing on the ledge of his apartment about to jump off. His neighbor gets shot trying to inspect the noise from outside. Intruder trying to enter his shielded door. Eddie starts to contemplate the choices he made in his life to reach this point. The scene cuts to the past, a pathetic Eddie in a bar trying to explain to a bunch of strangers about the book that he has written, but nobody even believed him. Moving forward, we see Eddie trying to write but procrastinating a lot. Even his girlfriend, Lindy, dumps him. Although he tries to propose to her, she reminds him how his marriage with Melissa never worked out and they got divorced. On walking back home, he bumps into his ex-brother-in-law, Vernon, on the sidewalk, and they chit-chat a little while about Eddie and how he is doing. On finding out that Eddie is trying to write a book but is having problems trying to concentrate, he offered Eddie a solution by inviting him to try out this new drug in the market which helps people concentrate. Eddie takes the pill from Vern and heads home. On the way, he thinks about Melissa and how pathetic his life was going. Eddie thinks about how much worse can his miserable life get, and he takes the pill given by Vern. On reaching his apartment stairs, he sees Valeria, his landlord's wife, who starts to complain to him about the rent that was due on his end. The drug starts to kick in and suddenly he starts to see and remember everything much more clearly. He notices a law book in Valeria's bag and instantly identifies it as the law book that he read 12 years ago in college in another girl's dorm while he was waiting for her to bring the condoms. Surprisingly, he could now access all the information that he must have seen someday passing by, which he never recorded or tried to remember. This became very helpful to impress Valeria, and they wrote her paper which was due and also make love after spending 45 minutes on her paper. Moving forward, Eddie reaches his apartment and organizes his whole apartment and works on his book. The next morning, effect of the drug disappears and Eddie goes back to being dull, but what remained was the initial draft of the book that he worked upon, which he took to his editor, and she loves it. After realizing that this new drug was amazing, he goes to Vern and asks him for more. Instead of giving Eddie more drugs, he instructs him to run some errands for him. After completing the errands, when Eddie returns back to Vern's apartment, he finds out that Vern has been murdered by someone and the whole apartment was in a mess, which clearly indicated that they were looking for the drug, NZT, and were not able to find it. Eddie calls 911 and starts to look for the drug himself, and after some searching finds the supplier's stash of Vern, and hidden with it was some $800 with a black book, which makes Eddie very happy. The scene cuts to Eddie being questioned by police officer in the station. In between questioning, Melissa calls the officer's desk and talks to Eddie, saying that she doesn't want Eddie to come to Vern's funeral. Officer was suspicious of Eddie but sends him home, stating that he would call him if he would need anything else. Eddie walks out of the station back to his apartment highly paranoid. After reaching his apartment, Eddie takes a pill of NZT, and we see a montage of Eddie completing his book in only 4 days. He starts taking the pills regularly, and the things he could do with those pills were astonishing. He learned to play the piano in 3 days. He started to use math for gambling, which made him win a lot. He learned new languages and became very fluent in them very easily, which he used to pick girls in club. He knew what are the right combination of chemicals required in his mom's cancer treatment. He starts to hang out with smart peoples and start to impart knowledge like never before, impressing people with his knowledge. He made some rich friends and started to chill out with them in expensive places and started to live life excitingly. Soon he starts to saturate and tries to find higher dose of adrenaline wherever he could find. In one of his endeavors, he suddenly gets an epiphany and knew what he needed to do and how to do it. For accomplish his big goals, he needed money, so he starts to dabble in the stock market with the $800 of cash that he found in Vern's apartment. He made 2,000 of those 800 in a day, but it was very slow for him and he needed a lot more of money. Moving forward, we see Eddie meeting a loan shark to get $100,000 from him as a loan, which the guy gives him after explaining what he will do if he fails to return the loan on time. After getting the money, Eddie starts to work his charms in the stock market and made round about $2 million off of it. This turned heads of many giants of the game, and they become interested and also impressed by Eddie. It results in Eddie getting noticed by one of the biggest players in the game, Carl Van Loom, who wanted to meet Eddie. The scene cuts to Eddie having dinner with Lindy. He orders his food in Italian and asks for Lindy's forgiveness. Lindy gets very impressed with Eddie and forgives him, and they start to date again. As the days passed, Eddie becomes more famous day by day, and he also starts to get the feeling that he has been followed. One day while with Lindy, Eddie suddenly starts to feel something strange, but he ignores it and wakes up on the next day to meet with Carl Van Loom. Eddie impresses Carl with his astonishing pattern recognizing techniques and travels back to his home in Carl's car, where Carl gives him some documents to analyze and tell him what he thinks about it. At the end of the ride, Eddie tells him about his evaluation, which in turn impresses Carl a lot more, and Eddie gets his second meeting with him. After Carl left, Eddie didn't feel like going back in his apartment, so he starts walking on the sidewalk and thinking about his future and what he can achieve. He also thinks about how he can be a president, but suddenly he starts to feel a little strange and he finds out that he is starting to skip time without remembering what happened. The skip continues and he finds himself dancing in a club with a girl, then he finds himself going into a hotel room with some other girl and they have intercourse. Moving forward, Eddie finds himself in between a fight in the subway where he knows how to fight from every TV show and fighting documentary that he saw. Once again a skip happens and Eddie finds himself on top of a bridge, missing 18 hours of his life. Coming back to his apartment the next day, Eddie tries to make some sense of the documents sent by Carl without the NZT, but he couldn't understand a single word in them. He meets with Carl but was not able to focus in the meeting at all and kept on looking towards the television where the news of the girl being murdered with whom he was in the hotel room earlier. He exits the meeting abruptly, thinking if he may have killed the girl. After reaching home, he gets a call from Melissa warning him about the pills that he may have been taking according to her. Eddie tries to contact Vern's other clients from the Black Book and finds out that most of them are either dead or not in a great condition. While dialing the last number from the book, the phone of the person sitting next to him rang, which alerted Eddie and he started to run away from him. The man started to chase Eddie, but he was able to evade him by getting into a cab. Eddie meets with Melissa in a restaurant and she tells him that she also used the drug before and the side effects only gets more worse. He suggests Eddie to not stop using the drugs suddenly but to release off the habit as slowly as he can, by reducing the doses or he could die. After meeting with Melissa, Eddie runs into the loan shark on his way and he takes the last pill of NZT from him and consumes it while Eddie takes out cash from the bank to return him. We don't see any visible signs of intelligence effect on the loan shark. Eddie meets with Lindy and explains him to retrieve the hidden stash which he hid in her apartment. After retrieving the pills, she finds out that somebody is following her and she asks help from two strangers, but they get stabbed, so she ran from them and calls Eddie to tell him about the situation. Eddie suggests him to take one of the pills, after which she will know what to do. As suggested, Lindy took the pill and she understands completely what she needs to do in order to save herself. So she started to run and injured the other man with a bunch of ice skates and escaped successfully. Lindy reaches Eddie and gave him the pill to recover, after which she told Eddie that she is afraid of the pill and tells him that she knows it feels invincible after taking it, but she prefers not to take it. After which Lindy leaves and Eddie saw the loan shark waiting on the street in front of his apartment and he asks for more pills, which Eddie gives him to buy some time and hire some bodyguards in order to protect himself from him. Eddie was on the roll again after taking the pills and made the largest merger in the history a possibility. He started to find ways to sustain the pill supply by trying to manufacture it himself. He talked to a chemist and offered him $2 million if he can make it in 6 months. Scene cuts to Eddie siding with the detective as the detective tells him that there was a witness who identifies him on the scene of murder. Eddie hires the top lawyer named Morris Brandt to get him out of it. Scene cuts to Eddie sitting with Carl, coming to terms for the merger with Hank Atwood, who looks a little frail for his age. After the discussion, Carl threatens Eddie to not become his competition as it would not be good for him and he wouldn't want to cross him. Eddie returns to his thrashed hotel room and decides to take a more secure living place and buys the most secure apartment with all the right things to protect him. Moving forward, we see Carl and his team waiting for Hank in the conference room to sign the contracts for the merger. After some time, Hank's wife appears and tells Carl that his husband is unwell, but they have every intention of signing the contract. While dropping Mrs. Atwood to the car, Eddie saw the same man who was chasing him few days back, working as the driver for Mrs. Atwood, and instantly understood why Hank was unwell. Scene cuts and we see Eddie standing in the police station for identification, but was saved as the witness chose some other guy and Eddie was relieved. Eddie goes back to a suspecting Carl. As Eddie tries to take more pill, he found out they were stolen and he doesn't have any left. Carl's assistant approaches and hands Eddie a parcel with his guard's severed hands in it and he freaks out and leaves the room back to his apartment. While in his apartment, the loan shark approaches and tries to break in. The scene goes to the initial scene of the movie and we see Eddie standing on the edge of his balcony, but instead of jumping he tries to remember where he could find that one pill of NZT that can help him, but in the ruckus the pill falls from his hand, and the loan shark attacks him. While getting ready to torture Eddie, he tells Eddie how instead of taking the pills he intakes it directly into the bloodstream after diluting them, which makes them more effective. Eddie somehow manages to kill the man, but was stuck as there were other two who were trying to break into his safe. Then he saw the loan shark's blood flowing from his body and started slurping it, which works, and he was under the spell of NZT once again. He manages to kill the other two guys also. Moving forward, we see Eddie meeting with the hired assassin who worked for Hank, who was dead, and Eddie doesn't matter to him anymore. Eddie explains him how the lawyer Morris Brandt had taken the pills which he stole from Eddie, after which he helps him to retrieve those pills. Moving forward to few months ahead, we see Eddie running for office, and Carl came to meet him in his office and threatens him that he knows Eddie's little secret and has shut down all his labs. Carl insinuates that in order to live he has to depend on Carl, who is now the sole manufacturer of NZT. He would be willing to give him NZT, and in return in the near future he would be needing some favors. Eddie doesn't like that one bit and explains Carl how he is not on NZT anymore and how he had tweaked and re-engineered the formulae to make it better. He further make Carl see how he is 50 moves ahead of everybody by predicting a crash down the street, and told him that he would not be needing his services anymore. Later he had lunch with Lindy, on which he again impresses her by speaking a foreign language with the waiter, and the movie ends. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe the video for more videos like this.